Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. This is a Rappler Talk I'm really looking forward to, particularly given the kind of churn and the kind of changes that are rocking the world of journalism on every front, and especially here in the Philippines. Joining us today are three people who I've known for many years, who we have looked up to. They've held tremendous power. They've started as reporters, worked their ways up the newsrooms to head those newsrooms. They came through and they represent the history, the collective narrative of Philippine history. Joining us, I'm going to start. We have Tina Monzon Palma, Vergel Santos, and Cheche Lazaro. I know I don't really have to introduce who they are to you, but let's zoom in first. Tina Palma. Tina Palma yesterday just received the Gawad Plaridel Award, the 2017 award. And I remember when I first came to the Philippines in 1986, Tina Palma was on the cover of TV Guide. She was the anchor under Marcos who would read words but have her face say and mean different things. Protest by meme in our words today, right? So Tina Palma went through from the martial law days to GMA 7, ABS-CBN, and now an
ABC
anchor.
5.
ABC 5 in between, right? And so you've gone through tremendous power that you've held and helped define exactly what the standards of journalism are in the Philippines. Name one moment that was the most difficult choice you had to make in that time period.
Difficult choice. It was how to get the news at that time when I was in Channel 7 as fast as we could, given the technology available. So I recall covering Cory Aquino, the candidate, following her all over the Philippines. And because we had no facility and capability for a microwave or even a satellite transmission, the land trip or chartering a plane was the easiest way to get stories back into ours. So that was a challenge that we faced. And by the time the story got around, the reporters and the editorial team, would make it a point to make it as whole and as complete and comprehensive as possible, because now you had about a day's travel to write your story for television, and you were previewing on a U-matic camera. So that was challenging for us, and we would always remember the tagline of DZHP. You heard it first on DZHP, and that was the thing that.
You're live on Twitter. Sorry, so DZHP.
I use that. I use that as an example. The challenge, that was the difficulty I faced. How do you get it as fast? And there was no capability at all to do telephone interview because you had to patch it in the master control room. It was not as easy as
cell phone.
You first worked for DZHP?
No, I worked with DZMT and ABC.
Yeah,
ABC.
right.
And then on DZMT, this is getting to know you, when DZMT was shut down, that was the Rosas family.
Yes.
Sila,
Yeah.
Chino.
I
I went to DZHP because that was the only one that was open because it was shut down. So that was a challenge.
So was the logistical challenge of the
Logistical
news,
challenge.
Right?
No editorial challenge. I would ignore it because I didn't think it was an editorial challenge. It was just how to get all the facts straight, everything, all bases covered, and video right. Nothing at all that was not going to be accurate.
But Tina, you're very modest. I mean, anyone going up through journalism today knows that you were the only anchor, only news head to have resigned because of a mistake that was made. This is the Maureen Hultman case. You were the only news head to go up against the military who's telling you to shut down. Not the only news head. There are other news heads who've also done that, right? But you went up against it. I mean, in these two choices, the Maureen Hultman deciding to resign during the coup attempts in GMA 7, deciding to air something when power tells you you can't. What went through your head?
The exercise on what you may call censorship or not allowing us to air things that was not good for their own image, to me was an exercise of of negotiations. The whole effort was trying to make this other person who did not want our story aired, explaining to him my point of view that this is why I want the story aired, and you're telling me not to air the story. So the debate was on that. And editorially, I would make him understand that both of us were doing our own
Job.
delivering our own values to our craft. And at some point they will say, okay, and the story gets aired. But this was very, very tedious. It was a diligent calling of by everybody and asking me, and please, they just don't give you a reason. The simple reason is, if you air it, the coup attempt might even go bigger, or there may be more people joining. But I said, no, I think the people deserve to know. There is nothing at all that I will say in that piece that will be treason or rebellious in nature or treachery or whatever you call it. It was just going to be a narrative of, I assure you that if you love your country, I too love my country. We don't want to see it go down. So it's that kind of a discussion, nothing.
But these values, the values that are there, has not every news head follows that. I guess, what are those things that guided you as the head of?
No, it was. I thought I had a job that was just so simple. I covered a story, we wrote the story, and we put it, and gave all our effort in trying to make it a story that was really accurate. The objectivity sometimes gets lost along the way. But you also told us, you'd also mentioned in your opening that we were some powerful people. No, we were not. I did not consider myself powerful. The only power I thought was just I selected the stories that was going to go
That's power.
that day. That's no. But I was responsible for making sure those stories were good enough for the public to even.
I think that's called humility. But in the end, you helped determine exactly what the
agenda was.
public
Yes,
truth
that's what they
was.
say. News, they say is what I say it is. That's a simple kind of a mantra that we have. News is what I say it is, but it's not. There's some truth to that. No, I follow that too. Verhel, you take over.
Verhel, the print man in between the two television ladies.
Yeah.
I mean, you are actually right now you're the chairman of Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility.
Yes.
You were the publisher for Business World. I mean, you
Yes.
started as a reporter, worked your way
Yes.
up the ranks.
Yes.
For you, you're the most outspoken right now. I think in terms of landscape, right? What
Possibly.
was the most difficult choice you had to make when you held the reins of power?
Maria, I don't remember having made any difficult choices in my professional life. It's probably because I think I knew exactly what I was getting into, and that it was a business of snap decisions. It was a business conducted in the hurry and flurry things, and therefore I simply needed to do what I needed to do. I did not become conscious of any sentimentalism or emotionalism in my work. It's probably because of that. I didn't have a chance to be afraid, to find things difficult. And I'm only grateful that I have probably developed that kind of outlook toward my own.
You've stood your ground against vested interests, especially ownership.
Oh yes, but only because I needed to, because that was when I edited the Revived Manila Times, and learned that I had crony money in my paper. At the time, of course, crony was one of the dirtiest words, and I had to go up to my principals and tell them to have this crony partner divest himself of his holdings, or they didn't have a newspaper the next day.
Was that difficult?
That wasn't difficult for me. I mean, I knew exactly what to do. I woke up in the morning, having been informed by an old friend of mine, Adela Chica from the Wall Street Journal, that the New York Times said my dance was putting out a story in the next 2 days, I think, about crony money in my paper. So I went in the morning and went to see the principals, and they said, what they said they did, apparently as a matter of insurance, because we were putting out that paper before the snap elections, and I insisted that one of the conditions was for us to make it clear where we stood, and so we had an editorial saying that enough is enough of Marcos. So, and then they had the crony divested instead of his holdings, and I told them we'll have to come clean on page 1, write about it. And they thought they had done enough by simply
letting him go.
I said, no, we had to come clean. And in fairness to you, right beside the paper reporting that story, you can say what you like, right beside it. Of course, that happened. And then 2 weeks later, I got a wire, not told, but got a wire at home asking me to go on leave indefinitely.
Go on leave. Indefinitely.
Indefinitely.
Oh.
I knew, well, the signal was clear. So I wanted to go. So I immediately went to the office and started collecting my stuff, ready to leave for good. I mean, I knew what choice to make. And then I was stopped by the staff saying that they wanted to make a last effort
Stand.
and demanding my reinstatement. And so I stopped. They went, and they were waved away, ignored. And so I said, I'm going, no, could you stay for a while? I said, what's the point? But don't follow me because it's difficult to find jobs these days, you know. And so I was there, and once the signal was given that I could go, I did, and behind me was the whole staff walking out of the paper.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was not a very difficult decision for me. It was more difficult for others.
Has that happened again? Has that ever happened again?
No. I think this is the first time too.
That was the first and last time. Tina, yours was the first and last time.
Yeah, that was it.
I'm
Which?
gonna-
Which was the
well,
first?
dami kaya. But let me go to Cheche. Cheche Lazaro, I know you very well. I worked with you for a very long time. Cheche Lazaro handled ABS-CBN Public Affairs, that's what it was called then. Started a company called Probe Productions, Inc., and through the years maintained an independent, small news television documentary investigative journalism unit for you. I might even be able to remember what was the most difficult decision you've ever had to make?
Nothing to do with editorial content, everything to do with censorship. Censorship in terms of pressure that you got from the advertisers. They wanted certain conditions for supporting your program. And of course, you needed support to be able to survive. So that was a difficult decision, but it was also a very clear decision that we would side with the editorial content in all cases. Then there was censorship from your carrying station. At one particular point, which was, we had several minor skirmishes, but the main skirmish was being booted out of the station for doing a story on what we perceived to be a legitimate story on a crony of one of the presidents.
Genuine.
Yes, Efraim Genuino. And because of that, we were booted out. We lost our airtime, we lost our ability to air, and of course, as a small independent company that was solely dependent on airtime. We didn't own
And
the
this
station.
is from GMA 7, right?
Yes, this is on GMA 7. They booted us out, and we were left out in the cold. Now, as a person who was running the company, the questions that come to your mind is, how do you survive? Where do you get the next payroll? These are practical solutions. But during that time, you know, the level of idealism, the determination not to sell out in any case was very strong. So that we soldiered on despite the booting out, the boot that we got from the station. So I think the largest challenge was pressure and censorship.
Yeah, gosh. In all of the things that you guys have done, the choices you've made, were you ever afraid of it? Like in this case, were you afraid? Were you afraid for Probe's future?
I think at that time, you could have called us foolish, very idealistic, imbued with so much idealism. You begin to think, like they say, hire a teenager when he thinks he knows everything. So at that point, we were at that mindset that we could do anything. We could fight the windmills, and we could do anything that we wanted to do. So you could have said we were foolish, but there was a very, very, very strong ethic for integrity. It was so ingrained in the team, not just me, but the whole team was so determined to do something. They were young, they were idealistic, probably foolish when you look back at it, but on hindsight, we have no regrets. I have no regrets about having made those decisions. They were very clear at that moment. There was no tentativeness about what we did.
So it's actually about power, right? And standing up to power. So let me ask you your definition of journalism that's imbued, the way you've acted in it. And all of you have made choices that actually went against your own personal interests, resigning and walking out, resigning and walking out. What are these values? What is the mission? What powers you?
I honestly did not experience the kind of censorship that she speaks about, because I was able to work my way in making sure that there is no censorship. If there was pressure at all from the advertiser, I would painstakingly ask the people I was working with for me to speak to the people who wanted some requests from advertisers as far as whatever it is, no? So it was not at all difficult in those two regards, censorship and advertising pressure, because in most of the instances when I was part of the whole case of an advertiser, I talked to the owner, I would talk to the advertising agency, I would talk to our people, and I would explain to them why the story has to be told. So I have not had a difficulty where I was overruled, because I remember most of the times I would say, sir, or whoever it was I was talking to, the owner or the advertiser, there are just two things. After we talked here, I said, two things will just happen. Either I am fired or I quit. So it ended there, and I was not fired. And my irrevocable resignation happened on the Marine Hold experience, because that to me was totally different. It shattered my whole being.
Yeah.
If you make a mistake, you're the face, you are the boss. And this is the life of a woman, and the family must have been savoring all of these, even in a comatose situation of their child. And here you are, you were with me, remember?
Declaring her dead.
Declaring her dead, and I just had to.
But Tina, you were too harsh on yourself, because we are human, we do make mistakes. But of course, when you're unforgiving of yourself, it's very difficult to move on.
It was a little difficult for me. It took a long while before I was able to.
You're too harsh on yourself.
Is that what it meant? But I said there was no way. Who would? Of course, the network let go of some people who were found to have been
Behind
it.
Yeah.
But I had to do it. I could not, the trauma. I could not face. I said, how can I look at the camera and show my
Yeah.
what kind of a posture I would have when I deliver the news when you know that this woman, yabang-yabang nito, nagkamali naman ito.
So
I couldn't take that.
gauging on the values that drove you there were what?
The values that drove me there is when you make a mistake, you own up to it. You are responsible for that network. You are accountable. You are
Accountability.
accountable.
Yeah.
I think that's the key factor there.
Yeah.
Accountability is
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah.
When I say that you're too harsh on yourself, because everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect. You've been in the industry for so long. It's impossible for you not to fall into some kind of a trap like that. But accountability I think, is the overarching characteristic that should be imbued in every journalist.
Yeah.
Take responsibility for what you said, for what
Yes.
you did, for the story that you put out on the air. And if you're wrong, accept it and don't paper it over.
Yeah.
Don't make excuses for the mistakes that you make. Because once you do that, then you're caught in a spin, in a web of lies that you have to keep on manufacturing to keep your story afloat. But the moment you say, it's my fault, that ends the whole controversy.
For Helen, ikaw, your definition that powered you through all this.
You know, I've never known of anyone coming to me offering a compromise. You know, it's probably because I have an all too simple understanding of what the job I'm doing is, so that I didn't even give anyone a chance to see whether one was offering a decent or reasonable compromise. I didn't allow it in all my years as a journalist. I didn't allow it.
I think that's also something all three of you have in common.
I didn't allow it, and therefore, a very good example would be when Business World got sold. Immediately knowing the power taking over, I wrote immediately a letter of resignation, effective on the day of the takeover, and
this is the MVP.
and
group
because
of
it was
companies.
it was clear to me that this was the end of an era, and that I would have problems working with owners who happen to be spread thin across the critical industries of the country, and the only possible point of compromise would be for these owners to execute a document ceding to me all editorial power of editorial judgment, which they wouldn't do. So it could be a simplistic understanding of my own profession, possibly, but that has been that's what I've been. I didn't want to complicate things for myself, and I didn't think journalism could be complicated enough. It's simple. Journalism is putting out an occurrence of public interest. You know? By public interest, I mean in the interest of the community in which journalism works in. I mean that's simple enough to me. And even my own relationship with my staff was rather clear, and my staff didn't exactly like it. In fact, they come to me now saying that they like me better now that I'm no longer their editor. And because at the time, I always said that my say goes. You know, I like any editor, I would imagine.
Top down,
Yeah.
really? That's how we all grew up, right?
Yes,
Top
yes.
down control.
What
And
I
all
say,
three of you held.
what I say goes. It is not a dictatorship because I also
Bottom up.
assured my staff that I would take all the excrement in the morning. I wouldn't have anyone.
You won't pass it on.
Yeah, I would pass it on. That was how it was. And given again the nature of the business, I thought one leading a news organization should be as bold as that. That's what I thought.
Well, that takes a lot of courage.
Have these definitions. So given, I mean, just consolidating what you guys have said, one is the tremendous courage all three of you have had to stick to these values. Certainly not every news head not every journalist in the Philippines follows these, right?
Maybe they just don't try to.
I think again, humility,
You don't,
Tina.
you don't think it's being foolish? When you look back at those times and you made those decisions quite definitively without blinking an eye, in your case, you're just walking out. Under more practical terms, people today, when you look at them and look at their stories, will not do that because that will be foolhardy. You're going to lose your salary, you're going to lose your living, you're going to lose whatever prestige you have by walking out on something that has been good to you. Some people will say that's foolish, but I think at the time that these things were happening, all of a sudden the defocused environment became so sharply focused that you made decisions that on hindsight could look foolish, but at that time they were the right decisions to make.
But those were
Agreed.
different times.
And
Reckless when you make a decision, recklessly,
yeah.
foolishly,
Yeah,
sometimes silly.
Yeah.
on hindsight. No?
But you don't look
On
at
hindsight,
them.
no, on
They
hindsight.
your decisions actually helped define what Philippine journalism was and became in that time period. I know you won't agree with me because you're far too humble, but,
No,
but it's correct,
it's not
right?
about being humble. It's just that I think it was. I see the kind of journalists we have now who do not have the patience to defend their story because there's no time in the newsroom to engage your editors or your segment producers or your video editors on what that thing should look like. I want this done in this way because there's so many other minds
Distractions.
and distractions.
Yeah.
So
But we do learn from every decision that we make.
Yeah.
Yes,
We in fact
absolutely.
advance from every decision that we make. Because
Or you become more
that's how it
resolute.
is. Yeah.
more resolute.
More
Yeah.
resolute.
But I would
But
say,
certainly no regrets, certainly no.
so you talked a little bit about how the world has changed, right? The pace has moved faster. Let's fast forward to today. How do you look at journalism today? Journalism is in crisis globally. How do you mentioned about not having time to defend a story, to argue a
no,
story.
there's no discussion anymore in the newsroom
Which you love.
editorially,
You-
which I like to be a part of. But there's hardly any because of the time constraints and because of the urgency. The material comes in late, so it's just what you see is not a well thought of piece, even if it was a breaking story.
And it's because of the landscape. The
Yes,
landscape
it
has
has
changed so
changed.
dramatically.
It has.
Everybody is now a journalist, and there's no vetting of the material that's coming out. And it's coming out from multiple platforms. It's not just TV and print and radio. It's no longer tri-media. It's now multi-platform media. And anybody can assert herself in whatever platform or platforms he wants to be a part of. And that's the scary thing. I mean, it's a beautiful thing because the access, the democratization of access has been made it available to everybody. But it's scary because there's no vetting.
No, but I know one in due course develops in one a certain professional, moral, and ethical system, so that when something is inserted in you, you produce a result worked out by that particular system.
Yes.
I've always adapted to tools. You know, when I started emailing in 1990, you know, I mean, uploading. Well, because I happen to have been very good friends with Raul Locsin, whose paper was the first wide paper in this country.
Yeah.
And therefore,
You
and then
adapted.
I have quickly come to terms with the reality that print is going out of print. I mean, I have always been a print man, so I go on Rappler.
You go online.
Verhel is a thought leader on Rappler, so
That's how I do it. I realize that print is no longer the sanctifying medium unlike before.
Yeah.
In the beginning, print was. Even if you saw
Check
a
your
boxing
newspaper.
bout,
Yeah.
yeah.
if you
Yes.
saw a boxing bout, you still read the papers the next day.
Yes.
to get the confirmation that indeed what you saw happened. You know, this is how.
Yes,
But not
that's
anymore.
true.
There are
true.
many
Okay.
questions that are coming in, and I'm going to throw out a few, and then please pick up the strands that you're interested in. From at Noble Pine, would electronic media eventually render the print media obsolete with the sale of Inquirer? Are there other credible broadsheets left? From Angela Casco. What are your thoughts on hashtag activism, like hashtag we want Uber, hashtag justice for Kian, and hashtag fire Mocha? From Joseph Brim, whenever you were faced with situations that were in the ethical gray area, how did you navigate it back? And the last one on this, from Pepeng Salakot, moving forward, how do you see social media in terms of being a medium for legitimate news rather than a platform of propaganda? Ang dami kaya, no? Which ones do you want to untangle?
Well, all these questions are predicated on one basic reality, that what we have today is a whole huge, limitless dump of information, cyberspace.
Correct.
And that it is open to everyone.
Right.
So if you're looking for journalism, which is an organized enterprise, in which practitioners are expected to have been steeped in a certain range of disciplines and certain skills, I mean, disabuse yourself of the idea that cyberspace journalism will be so. I mean, it is something else now, and therefore, in fact, today, journalism, serious journalism, is up against spoilers who are better equipped, more powerful, and better orchestrated. I mean,
Better
this
orchestrated.
Yes, they have conductors. I mean, in certain cases, where blogging, for instance, is organized, it is organized in the sense of collusive, in the sense of probably conspiratorial. So these are very different times. I mean, I am myself. I don't particularly worry about these things, but I do worry now because of what I see.
What about the theory of the pendulum? You know, we
Big
are
swing,
moving towards the center after it has moved to both extremes. Is that possible in this scenario, that at some point the people who consume social media will mature in the same way that when television was reigning as king of all of these mediums, we were saying the taste levels of the people have to be upgraded. Of course, we don't know if that has been achieved,
because
if they've been able to upgrade their taste, because the pendulum has moved all the way to the left, all the way to the right. Do you feel that at some point it will come to the center?
This nation has been waiting to mature for probably 100 years.
Well,
And
do you
this
see
nation
the
has
light
been
at the
waiting.
end of the tunnel?
Yeah, this nation has been waiting for democratic institutions to be not developed, but be built. But democratic institutions have not been built.
Yes.
Why? Because it simply could not be built in a setting such as this, in a setting operating on the basic culture is one of patronage.
Patronage,
So
feudalism.
how do you even build a democratic institution in a setting such as this?
But you know, going back
Context.
to that question, with all of those hashtags
Yes.
that are now trending, don't you think that those are signs of people becoming more aware of the issues that we should be paying attention to, and that these issues might come to the fore because of these hashtags?
I would say a year and a half ago, yes, and now it's as easily 50-50 manipulated
Yes.
as it is, or manufactured reality as it is real civic engagement,
Manufacturing consent, even.
manufacturing consent.
So you think that is going to be the
Our biggest challenge?
yeah, or that's
Oxford
what's
University.
going to happen?
Well, Oxford University defines it calls it computational propaganda. We at Rappler called it the social media propaganda machine. And computational propaganda they defined as bots, fake news, and fake accounts, all manufactured to shepherd democracies, to shepherd a manufactured reality, to shepherd consensus, to create consensus even when there isn't any. And I think for us that is a challenge now, particularly for Rappler because we live on social media. How you all have, to varying degrees, dealt with this? How would Athena Palma, a Checha Lazaro, a Vergel
I wouldn't know how
Santos
to deal with it given this kind of a landscape of social media and the people engaged in it very actively and the way they really even try to push a trend.
Yeah.
Is what makes it difficult for me. I said, how can someone be convinced that a trend of about 100,000 tweets actually would make Maria Ressa the #1, whatever it is that they want to
Trending
call
topic.
you, trending topic.
So like 2 years ago, if you tweeted 7,000 times in a minute, you could trend it. There's even a formula for it, and the platforms, whether it's Twitter or
But
Facebook,
the word trending has
understand.
lost its whole meaning.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I hate it when they say we would trend it today.
We are also
That's not possible anymore.
They were so fixated on the democratic idea that whoever has the numbers is right. I mean, this is really mad because I think it all depends on the level of intellectual and moral understanding of things, you know, and it has very little to do with numbers.
Yes.
You know? But the problem is all the same. Numbers are numbers. When you have more people out there bashing you, I mean, you are being bashed in that measure.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how it works.
Feels good. It feels good to.
I don't know whether it feels good. I don't have.
So
I
it's
don't
still-
even have a
it's still
chance.
It's still
It's
a
still a
numbers game.
numbers game.
It's
but
still a
yeah.
numbers game.
Of course, democracy is like that. It is the rule of the numerical majority. It's always, it is always so. But as they always say, they can't think of any better system, you know, than this. No matter if, in this case, numerical majority wins.
So you've lost before you even began the game.
Well, we have to go beyond that, right? Because the realities are so. A few other questions here. There's a question about the bloggers being accredited in Malacanang from Dix GIOF. Do you think the process of bloggers accreditation by no less than the Office of the President provides any benefit? Another question from Alvin James Blanza Magno. As veteran journalist, veteran meaning powerful and older, experienced, that served the Filipino people for so many years. What are your thoughts about the widespread dissemination of fake news in our country? Simultaneously, I've just tweeted to you the last two pieces in our propaganda series, the one on state-funded, state-provoked hate on social media. And the bloggers, pro-Duterte bloggers, being used as crisis managers. Your reaction to all of this, when the state now has the ability to manufacture consensus or manufacture reality?
Not just about the blogging, giving IDs to the bloggers. I don't
That's okay,
care.
right?
Everybody,
Yes.
You know, everybody wants to have an ID. That's the kind of culture we have.
yeah.
Let's have an ID, but to put them and define them as a journalist, I think is where the lines must be drawn. Are you a blogger for the day? Are you a reporter for a day? Are you just for a particular event? That's what they're trying to explain.
This is precisely the point. The point is to confuse between the confuse and to erase that line between
You think
blogging
so?
and journalism. The idea is to equate bloggers with journalists.
journalists?
You can't do that. I mean, by simply arranging things, you are able to give that impression. So
But as a
complaint-
journalist, are you insulted because they gave
I will never be
an
insulted.
ID? Of course not, because you are the journalist. You know what your craft
It's
is.
not about whether I feel insulted or not.
No,
It's
but
about
putting
giving
them
the
on the
wrong
same-
signal to the public. We are accountable to the public. You know?
I have an issue also with bloggers. If the Malacanang is accrediting them, that puts a little bit of a question mark. So who will they accredit, and on what basis is the accreditation being made? Because I think I'm a big supporter of independent organizations doing the accreditation so that it has no vested interest. If Malacanang accredits the bloggers, then there is a question. They may not intend to only accredit those that are favorable to them, but it raises the question of what are the parameters for accrediting bloggers.
I wrote about it many months ago when the idea was floated.
Yes.
And I distinctly remember, and I'm sure I'll find the quote, Andanar saying that after all, these people helped Mr. Duterte win the presidency. It's a reward. I mean, he cannot deny that. He said it.
Yes.
All right.
He said it.
So that about proves that suspicion that
So
what kind
not
of bloggers are
all
going to be
bloggers are
accredited.
created equal.
No, but like
I mean,
Mr.
there
Duterte,
were, right?
no, but like Mr.
Let's
Duterte,
we'll talk about
Andanar
the
can change his
pro-Duterte
mind.
bloggers.
You know?
Yes.
But
yes.
like Mr. Duterte can always change his mind. It is no longer the reason. It is simply that bloggers have become such a
powerful block.
that they need this kind of acknowledgement.
Official.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of one of the things that the pro-Duterte bloggers, so again, you can look at the tweet, state-sponsored hate, the rise of the pro-Duterte bloggers, and part 2, which was released last week, is blogger propagandists, the new crisis managers. And these are the people, the sources from PCOO, from the Malacanang Palace. I think the question here is so much hate. I mean, in about a year and a half, the anger and the hate that has been fomented online, it changed drastically.
But what is the source of that hate? Are these all manufactured hate messages? Or
No.
are these messages real, coming from persons who feel this way?
I would say manipulating
Yeah.
real gaps between the rich and the poor, the
Yes.
economic class. Tina, you've been watching.
What is
Go.
the impact of that? The hate coming out of bloggers. What is the impact on the citizenry?
Sure.
Are we now more convinced that the bloggers are to be taken merely as bloggers and not to take them as journalists? Are we really defining in the same breath the division between blogging and censorship?
I think
Is
the
that
division
happening?
has been lost.
No, they're
Do you see
bloggers.
no, it has.
I think
been
the line
lost.
has already
the
been
impact
blurred.
they have crossed.
There are
Wala na.
journalists who blog, but when they blog, they should not be
Identify themselves.
identified as journalists. Why? Because they have just escaped that structure, that organization,
Discipline.
that discipline in
but
which
the-
they should operate as a profession.
Yeah, but the question is, do people who consume the blogger's article or the journalist's article, can they tell the difference?
No, they cannot.
They
And-
cannot.
And that's where
Why?
that's where the danger is.
And the other question is, does it matter there's a difference, particularly when in this day and age it's actually a behavioral economics. It is if you are pro-Duterte, you want to read, Facebook will only, when you click pro-Duterte stories, it will only feed you pro-Duterte stories in the algorithms. So you'll never actually see any side except for what you
Yes.
want.
Yes.
So it's had this, the impact of it is, I think the anger is very real, and this is what we've seen from the data. The anger is very real because the haves, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, elite politics, those things are real, right? People want more, but we've segmentized and created these echo chambers in society, and they don't meet that space where journalism used to
it's a vacuum.
to live.
It's now a vacuum.
And how do you define journalism?
Is there a segment that actually will be able to understand?
That's a problem. We're looking for reasons. If the continuation of the Duterte presidency itself can scarcely stand to reason, what do we have here? I mean, the thing is that we're looking for something reasoned, something arguable, but this is not. I mean, hate is something that can be understood but cannot be reasoned or argued.
You don't think there are enough of good, decent journalists who will be able to at least catch up with the way the bloggers do and giving the public the truth,
I think
and disregarding and really at some point trying to bring down the bloggers who actually create hate speech.
I think
Is there
it can work if
a way
there
it
wasn't
can
so
be
much.
done?
So what we've seen at least is that one person will tweet a normal. Verhel will tweet once, maybe 10 times in a day, but then the propaganda machine can tweet
Counters it.
a million
Yes.
times.
So
You
it's
know,
still
it
a
can
numbers
be-
game.
There is that's
It's
where it
still a
is. It
numbers
is a
game.
numbers game, and I think so. So I actually, Tina, the question that I'd have is, how do you bring back values when the arguments are not about the stories? It's about creating straw man enemies. The Liberal Party, which is essentially non-existent in terms of our politics right now, right? I mean, do we agree the opposition? There is no opposition. We have a supermajority in the legislature, the most powerful president in decades, because he will appoint 13 out of 15 the justices of the Supreme Court. So he's got legislative, executive, and judiciary. Given that, the pro-Duterte bloggers, the propaganda machine that's been created, that shifted, became weaponized after he became president, they now become attack dogs of hate against anyone who questions the administration. Normal things journalists would do, report what President Duterte says. You will get clobbered on social media, and I'm sure we're being clobbered on social media
Oh, yes.
now, right?
Well, but the moment civility and reasonableness were lost from discourse, this is what happens.
What about-
And how do you bring them back? How do you bring them back?
What about the question of fighting the war with the same weapons they're using?
We're not willing to mechanize. I don't think it's a journalist. I don't think as journalists we should do that. There is something dark
Yeah.
in this kind of manipulation.
Yes.
So what we do is we report it.
Yeah.
We make it transparent. But
Okay.
how do you deal with people's fears? Because if someone questions an extrajudicial killing, an alleged extrajudicial killing, they get clobbered on social media, and the threats are very personal.
Yes. You don't think that hate and negativity has a lifespan?
No.
Does it live forever?
No, these emotions are rooted deeply in a number of other things. One of them is culture. If you happen to have seen the generations before you never lifted appreciably from poverty, I mean, you're bound to breed people in hate, and these are the very people looking to be redeemed by shortcuts, by quick fix, and that's very much rooted in the culture. This is the deeper problem. I mean, it's not as if you could simply repair. This is not about.
You're saying our culture engenders this kind of behavior.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying. If you are operating on a culture of patronage, you're operating on a feudal culture, and this is what we're operating on.
Tina, I'm curious because I have seen you talk when you were heading the foundation. I've heard you talk people negotiate in a way that holds the values steadfast. How would you handle these things?
Which things?
The anger, the hatred, the attacks, the truth, the burial of truth in some ways. I mean, it becomes much harder to figure out what truth is.
But you will have to get a group of journalists or even bloggers, if at all they want to be called bloggers, who will be able to deal with them in a manner with more honesty and sincerity and integrity, and not form part of any pro-something group. I mean, there must be, at this, as we speak, a group of those emerging from our population, because I don't think they will let it go on longer than what it is
That's
that
what
we're
I'm wondering
feeling.
about.
We must first work within our ranks. I mean, that's
Yeah,
how it is.
it's us who
And
will
other
be
people
able to
should
find
should
out.
work within their ranks as well.
But
That's-
can we gather a critical mass at this point, and at the speed at which this hate speech and this negativity is, spinning out of control?
When you think of critical mass, you are thinking of a certain number of people pouring out onto the streets. Now, people now live in cyberspace. And those
Okay.
people who are prepared, who are willing
Some pain.
to go out there and show themselves are people who are older by 30 years from 1986. And therefore, the question
Why
is
did both of
ability.
you smile?
The question now is ability, not willingness.
Yes.
So-
Okay. No, on cyberspace.
Cyberspace.
On cyberspace, can you get the critical mass that is required to overturn hate?
How would you define journalism now, given this? Because when you say, can you get the critical mass, that means you're also asking journalists, right? And part of the confusion is, what are journalists? How would we define the new lines of journalism?
I wouldn't redefine it.
Same discipline,
Same
ethics.
discipline,
Yes.
ethics. You know, it's nothing to be reinvented because we want to be able to deal with another set of people who don't want to be journalists, do they?
No, I think they enjoy the ability to access the tools of journalism, and so they're practicing it in the way that they think it should be practiced.
I would say that they usurp the power that journalists, the gatekeeping powers journalists used to have.
Yeah.
They usurped it.
I would say, because in
Oh,
some
yes.
ways, some of the bloggers are actually more powerful than some of the news groups.
Yes.
It's an interesting time.
Yes, have the journalists, the legitimate journalists of what our reference point is the past, have they been silenced because they are so shocked by the shock waves of the sheer number of people that have been generating all of this hate?
I think that it's a different time for working journalists, particularly for the younger journalists. Like for me, what I found was I was surprised by the number of after we did the propaganda series, we had the weekend after an average of 90 hate messages per hour. Some of it is part of a machine, but many of it are real people who, because of their own leanings, are pushed further out, and then lack of civility. The standards of public discourse are gone, and yet the journalists are handcuffed because we will stick to the standards of transparency, accountability, consistency. We will not curse. We try. I mean, it's so the standards that we lived, that you lived through, may not work now. Authenticity. Part of President Duterte's power is his authenticity.
Yes.
The pro-Duterte bloggers are demanding they be allowed to continue using profanity because they feel this is a guttural part of,
This expresses how they feel.
yeah.
More than a redefinition of journalism, I think what is required today is a redirecting and redoing of journalism. The times call, for one thing, for more explanatory journalism. Journalism that explains to people
What's happening.
what's happening. But the problem is you can't explain things in a tweet.
Yes.
You will require a whole torrent of words to make people understand, and you will require a certain strategy. What do I say first? How do I say it? How do I make people understand that this is so? So it is about strategy.
Yes.
You know,
But
more
also
than
it
anything else.
seems that what we used to do as traditional journalists is just boring compared to what the bloggers. Because imagine if you go on Facebook now and they're hitting each other or hitting someone else in very provocative, very incendiary, emotional language. And journalists are trained to dilute, to take the emotion out and to present facts which tend to be boring without context.
Yeah. The idea precisely in their case is to incite,
Precisely.
to provoke, to scandalize. You know, and we can't do that.
To convince. Whereas journalists, I think we grew up thinking that we present it there and then you make up your mind.
No, we try to convince. They try to persuade. And they are able to do that because it's easier to persuade people than convince them. You know, if you play to the preferences, to the emotions of
Yes.
certain people, it's easier to get them to come around.
Yes.
But convincing, boy, that takes argument. That takes.
You know, that's an interesting point that you made about the language that they use. It's very real, it's raw, and it fully expresses how they feel. So in that sense, they have been successful. And, you know, we can't blame them for feeling that way and expressing it that way, because that's how you speak, you know, in the street language. Like
Yeah.
you said, we have very formal ways of expressing ourselves. And yes, it can be boring. I think the challenge for traditional journalists is to speak that language minus the extreme expressions using profanity.
I think I know, and if I didn't, I could learn to speak that language, except that we are prevented by simple civilities. This is our problem. I mean, I do utter
Curse words?
cuss phrases.
Yes.
But these are very private utterances. You know, in under my breath. You know, it's.
No, but I'm saying
These-
minus the curse words, but in a language that the people that you're talking to, in conversational language, we always used to say that for television, right? Write as though you are talking to somebody. But somehow we always revert back to the formal forms of doing things. Maybe it's time to rethink that.
Yeah. When if you say write as you talk, and considering the way they talk today, I mean, you wouldn't want to write that way. It is it's civility, it's basic senses. Oh,
Now you're catching the dilemma. Tina,
yeah.
No, I'm just thinking because you were saying that we have to. What was it you said about how to get the story? You have to explain things.
Yes.
I've been asked to accept interviews, and it's a quick one. This is, ma'am, pwede ko kayo interviewin
Yeah.
dito sandali, 1 minute lang, 1 minute lang.
It's the tweet.
And you're standing and you're rushing to go to another appointment, and here they are willing to take on a story on the run and hoping to get a whole I don't know.
It's the
space.
160,
if
it's
you-
the 160
It's-
character tweet kind of.
I know.
If
I
you
know.
ask me, I will not
But
deal
even
with
if-
bloggers. I will deal with the ultimate powers. I will deal with the president. I will deal with his alter ego. And I will ask him the hardest questions in the world. This is what I will do, but not deal with bloggers, because there's no way you can deal with them. Deal with the powers that be. We are expected to do that, actually.
Yes.
Journalism is expected to do that. Deal with the powers that be.
But this
Ask
group
them
of
basic
journalists
questions.
who are emerging from I don't know where
they're
they're coming
inhibited.
from. It's not even inhibition. It's the
They're
kind.
charmed.
They must be enamored with this kind. I can get a story from this woman
In 2
just
minutes.
by standing here for 10 minutes, and I can write a whole
Yes.
article on
Then
it.
we older people are guilty of default, because we haven't been able to show them precisely.
Aren't you? I'm
I do
thinking,
feel that
hoping,
now and then.
hoping that
I do.
there is a critical mass. We talk of critical mass emerging from somewhere who are listening to and observing what's going on
Yes.
in cyber space.
I think there are. Yes.
You see
And
it growing?
are now really looking at a battle plan. I mean, if there is a battle plan from all of these people that you speak about, there must be a tactic or a strategy that is being developed now.
No, but you know, I think
You
the other,
think meron ng ganon?
I think the other challenge is getting all of legitimate journalists together to do something in unison.
You
Because
know, I'm beginning to observe a growing opposite side, you know, to these bloggers today. I don't
Are
know
you
whether
seeing
or you
it's
have
going there?
no, I mean
On the opposite
on the
side.
opposite
On the
side
opposite,
of
okay.
this.
Well,
this blog.
I think what's
I
happening
mean,
also is that the machines, many of them, Mocha Uson, for example, is now an assistant secretary in PCOO handling social media. Another blogger is given a job in the Department of Foreign Affairs. They're being appointed to government
that's
office,
right.
so it's a little bit more dispersed. I will throw two questions that are coming, and they're connected to what you're discussing, which goes back, Verhel, you talked about you would go to the power, right?
Yeah.
This is the first step to soften you before you get to power.
Yeah.
I would think this, the propaganda machine. So Jade Alvarado is asking, what can you say about the war on drugs of the present administration? Pepeng Salakot is asking, are there scary similarities? Salakot. Are there
Salakot,
scary
yeah.
similarities on the way Marcos and Duterte handles media during martial law? I guess on both, right? So you go
the
back
basic
to
difference is that Marcos did it secretly, Duterte is doing it openly. But of course, Duterte cannot be seen doing it because of all the, because these are opener times than before. You have CCTV.
the
you
turf
have
is the
people.
same and different at the
Yeah.
same time. The same because traditional media is still there. It has not been removed. Print is still alive. Different because there's the addition of social media. It's a new battleground. And people, I think, at this point, are testing it, finding out what the limits are. And some are succeeding in trying to use it to their advantage. I think you were saying that this is a worldwide trend where social media has been used as a weapon to defend or to attack governments. So it's the same and different at the same time.
Actually, in the U.S., there's a Harvard study that just came out looking at Russian influence
Yes.
during the presidential
Elections.
elections in the U.S.
I mean, look at President Trump, if we may move away from the Philippines. He's using his Twitter account as his official page for statements of national interest.
But his numbers are coming down, not
Yes.
Duterte's.
Yes, yes. But that's also partly because the institutions in the
Exactly.
United
Very
States
strong.
and the journalists
Working
are-
institutions.
have worked
Yeah.
together.
They have working institutions out there.
Yeah, and the media institutions are pushing back.
Yeah.
Are pushing back. Are our media institutions pushing back?
No, we're not pushing back enough.
Are
We're
we
not pushing
afraid?
back. Some of us are.
Some of us are.
And what's the fear?
Many reasons.
They're the basic fears. I mean, being picked up one day,
Getting
ending up on
your-
the pavement
Getting
with a
your
bullet in the
BIR.
heart. BIR. I mean, we have our own
Taxes,
vulnerabilities, probably
screens.
because we have our own vulnerabilities that we are unable to act more boldly than we'd like to. It's because of our own vulnerabilities. I mean,
I
to
do,
the
I do
BIR.
agree with you by talking to the powers because maybe the president is not orchestrating this. Maybe the president is not aware of what's happening. I mean, that is
In fact,
that
I
is
think
a possibility.
In fact, I tend to believe that.
You're looking at me.
Given
man.
given the character of this man, as shown by clinical records, he is not one able to consciously plot things. I mean, he is one who operates on a hair trigger. He concedes to the one closest to his ear. I mean, he seems to be that sort of character. It's something that I've always thought about.
Is journalism, is media under attack now?
Oh, yes, yes,
I think it's threatened.
Yes, it is.
yes.
You spoke
No, you hear the president the few times that I watch him on TV when he has his public engagements. There are days when he just talks about ABS-CBN, where he will be filing cases, and he talks about Rappler, and the Inquirer.
The Inquirer.
Just
Journalists are not asking the hard questions. That's the problem. I mean, I have not heard anyone ask Mr. Duterte after he said, I cannot end this war successfully. Then the basic question that should be asked, provoked by that admission, is that since, Mr. President, that you have predicated the national development on the success of your war, and now you say that you cannot win it, what is the reason you're still here? I mean, this is a basic question. I think it is a legitimate question to ask. No one has asked me. Why questions are not asked? His own numbers have gained the currency of fact. 3 million addicts, 4 million addicts. You know, these numbers killed, that
But the
there are
fact checks
vigilantes.
have been there. We've all been
Hey,
doing
that's
those
right.
stories. They
Fact
just
checks have been there.
don't gain the kind of...
Attraction.
Yes.
And in the end, when you're the president of the country or you are the state media, that helped and fueled by the
No,
propaganda machine.
you are doing it. That's why you're being bashed. This is how it is. But all the others are not doing it. So they are somehow escaping
So
bashing.
we're back to words like chilling effect, words that were used during Marcos's time.
Yeah.
But it's different. I think it's different. Times are different.
Oh yeah, definitely. Times are different.
I'd say sometimes this may be more dangerous.
Yes, these are more dangerous times. The sense of impunity, I mean, never seen ever before. I mean, you know, the whole world has been turned upside down for us. You know, bloggers are now journalists. Notorious characters are being given medals. You know, instead of asserting self-respect and sovereignty, we are capitulating to China. Everything has been turned upside down. I mean, and very few people are complaining. This is the problem.
We cannot end on a negative note. we must have the way forward. Again, if you were running in, well, so Verhel, I'll challenge you on that. Some people are saying also that the administration's handling of the U.S. and China has actually brought China back to the Philippines and kept the United States here. Mm-hmm. Lots of things to go back and forth. Let's not go there. Let me. I know we've been speaking a while. I want you to just give us your final thoughts on where we are from your ethical, your positions, having made these decisions as journalists, and the landscape that we see today.
I see a need for media literacy programs, consciously and organized by people who would like to be able to share their experiences and their values, but at the same time looking, and I am not particularly fine-tuned to cyber media or cyber media, the use of cyber media, even in cyber sex.
Yes.
So it's the technology that I need to understand, and I think most of us in my generation need to understand. It's just too quick. I mean, you could say today this is a yes and tomorrow it is a no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to even catch up. I can't even. I'm just starting to learn how to share.
How to use social media.
And that's right, I agree. Let's work within our ranks.
Let's
Let's explain to our own colleagues what the times are like and what the times call for. And damn it, let's get them to ask the hardest questions. That's what I'd like to happen.
I have faith in the Filipino journalist. I think that there are many out there who are concerned about the present situation. I think we should get together. We should get our act together, restore the old, you can call them old traditional values that we were used to, that we grew up with. I think there is space for everybody to express themselves. And I don't want the bashers, the people who are speaking negatively or positively, to be banned from social media. Because I think that internet, the birth of internet has democratized the space, and I like that, because that is good for our democracy. But I think the journalists in our country should get together and move towards pursuing an agenda of restoring calm and rationality to media in our country, because we need it. We can't survive without the help of journalists who are trained in the craft. So I would like to end by saying that there is a positive note here if we get together. I think that's the case of the Filipino, right? We're all very talented, but we're all scattered all over the place. But we have proven time and again that when we get together, we can do a class act.
Tina, yesterday in your speech, you talked about journalists should not be timid. Are you saying journalists are timid?
Maybe not trained to ask the hard questions. I mean, if you have information that you can begin shooting and giving hard and asking the hard questions, if you're equipped with the facts to begin with, or even as you cover a breaking story, you get the facts as clearly as you can, and going back and asking the same questions to different kinds of operatives, let's say in an area where a crime has been committed or somebody has been a victim of tokhang. It's not as fast as going on the air and just telling them
Numbers.
numbers. I mean, merong mga pulis nanlaban, so binaril. That's the end of
So
the
it's
story.
actually looking at our own performance.
It's
as well.
looking
Yeah,
at
yeah.
our performance and staying and longer. I mean, spending more minutes in trying to get the facts. I mean,
Contextualizing the story. I think.
contextualizing the story as well.
Have values changed? Because
In
again,
a way.
online, yeah.
In a way, look, what pass for institutions are timid. The church, civil society, media. These are the institutions that should naturally come together in times
church has
like this.
spoken up.
The church has been guilty more of default than anything else. You know how long this war's been going on? Look at the pronouncements from the church. Why? Because the church has its own vulnerabilities. The media have their own vulnerabilities. The civil society have their own vulnerabilities. What are their vulnerabilities? They have been, to an extent, co-opted. You know, so what do you do? I think conscientizing is required, a great deal of it today. You know, it's reminding certain institutions of their moral duty more than anything else.
Moral duty. Fantastic. We've gone through, and there are many questions. I know that there are many
Look at
questions
the
we haven't
card,
yet
yeah.
asked. We'll give them to our guests here. Journalism, redefining journalism in crisis. The crisis is online, in the physical world, in business. And as we move forward, we're going to continue touching base with you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Guys, tweet, Facebook. You're all on Facebook and Twitter.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not.
My wife
We
is,
will.
and she's
I'm
making
not.
up for my...
I'm not.
Tina's.
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
been
You're
such a
welcome.
great time
Pleasure.
to go back
we in
over
crisis?
history.
Yes.
Are
The
we in
individual
crisis?
journalist.
When the nation is in crisis, everyone is in crisis, and the media in particular, we
No,
are
the
in crisis.
individual. I mean, the person,
The journalist?
the journalist, personally is struggling with what?
It depends on how do you take all these things. If you happen to take all these things in your stride, which you can't, then you probably don't feel in crisis at all. I do feel in crisis. because
You
I
feel in crisis?
I think, as a journalist,
Yeah.
I think truth is in crisis.
truth is in
because
crisis.
people
Yeah,
have
that's right.
no idea what to believe.
That's right. When truth
So-
is in crisis, everyone is in crisis.
And
Yes.
who has been
Yes.
the safeguarder of truth, right? The fourth estate was supposed to hold power accountable, and in many
It
ways...
is not to say that we don't have our own advocacies.
Yes.
We are biased in favor of truth, justice,
Human
and
rights.
freedom. I mean, so we are biased. I'm not.
It's a good bias.
I'm not embarrassed to say that I am.
We will say goodbye. As you can tell, we can continue this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria.
Tina
Thank you,
Palma, Vergel Santos, Chacha Lazaro. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
We just depressed ourselves. because I was gonna throw even more stuff on there.
But
You know how bad
that's
it
okay.
is.
We
A
need to be
million
depressed. We need
times,
to.
a million times. If you have something that's a million times a minute, today's reporters who are on social media, the reason why they don't ask is not because they don't know. It's because they know if they ask, they're gonna get clobbered on social
Exactly.
media. That's why
Exactly.
the propaganda machine is so
Exactly.
much